All right, we are live. Patrick, if you can request to be a speaker on Spaces, please, that'd be fantastic. Anyways, welcome to... Time to turn your volume down a little bit. But welcome to another episode of Go FUD Yourself. Today is Crypto Arms Race Day, which is Kiara's favorite day, but she's away in the middle of nowhere, apparently, for the next little bit. So my good friend Patrick from Arrow Markets is here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well, trying not to choke on my coffee.
Yeah, just unmute yourself on Spaces and we're good to go, please. Don't choke. Wait till after the pod at the very least, if you're going to do that. All right, so we are talking about a whole bunch of stuff today. Crypto Arms Race, for people that don't know, is where we go through, many different jurisdictions globally, talking about how they're all trying to attract, or in some cases, doing a really good job repelling crypto adoption and so on. And today is no different. So we're going to talk a little bit about a bunch of firms pivoting to domicile in Asia, which is interesting, not necessarily just domicile, but also focusing their marketing and user acquisition strategies on Asia. We're going to talk a little bit about Vietnam and some of the things that are going on there in terms of recommending crypto to their friends and things like that. We're talking about Indian crypto exchanges, which is relatively interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about Kenya. We're going to talk about Patricia, which is the Nigerian crypto exchange. We're going to talk about the EU a little bit. And lastly, we're going to talk about El Salvador. We talk about El Salvador all the time, but today we have an interesting article to discuss regarding Google Cloud. So we'll get to that. Quick reminder, we're a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're on all the major platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, Twitter, live video, Twitter Spaces, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. So check us out, like, share, subscribe, help us. We don't take any money for this show. We don't have any paid advertisements or anything. It's really just a service to the group. So any help you can give us would be amazing. Patrick, just before we get rolling and play our little video, do you want to do a quick blurb for people that aren't familiar with who you are? Kind of what's Arrow Markets? Who are you? What have you done?
Yeah, perfect. So I come from an academic background, did my PhD at UCLA Anderson in finance, taught for a little while, then went and worked at a startup that a friend of mine started out of UCLA. I kind of got my hands dirty doing some software development while I was there. So I became an economist and a software developer. And so when I kind of honed those skills is when I started building Arrow Markets with my co-founder, Ed Merez. Arrow Markets is an options trading platform on Avalanche. Come check us out on Twitter, where actually there's a bunch of really exciting things in the pipeline at Arrow Markets. So I encourage everyone to kind of stay on top of what we're doing.
Absolutely. We'll definitely post some links to your Twitter and most likely to the Arrow Markets landing page also, so people can easily access that below the video. All right. Without much further ado, we will play our little video and get right into it. Give me 1 second. Boom. All right. We are back. I love that video. I don't know why, but it's just my fave. I like the sound and the music is cool. And of course, I look jacked in that video. So definitely not going to complain about that. Okay, so we're going to start, I think, with we're going to talk a little bit about crypto pivoting to Asia. And so to set this one up a little bit, I think essentially where this article was coming from is that there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny in the US. And so we talk about this all the time, but with the scrutiny the way that there is, and with the opacity really, and I live in the US and so does Patrick. So we're well aware of, kind of the uncertainty around that, what it means to be a proprietor in the US right now, what it means to maybe service US users at all right now. And I think given that reality and given the US's relative tardiness to the table in terms of figuring this regulatory thing out. A lot of groups are going to Asia, and not necessarily just for their platforms, but they're also really focusing on a lot of the adoption that's happening over there, and a lot of the favorable demographics, a lot of younger people participating, a lot of wealthy people also participating from Asia. So super exciting. Patrick, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you guys have a lot of relationships in that part of the world also. So what are you seeing? What do you think? Is this the natural result of what the US is not doing or doing currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of a pattern, a trend that we have seen. This is played out now over a period of several years. So this isn't a new thing. What's unfortunate is that you still see new names leaving the U.S. and going to other jurisdictions where regulation is more favorable. Despite the fact that we've kind of already had these conversations about how this hurts innovation in the U.S. I think another missing piece to this conversation, I don't hear this point made quite enough, but it is, a solution for businesses to move to kind of do this jurisdiction shopping. But it's not a solution for the users. I mean, if I'm a user in the US, and if we're, as technology builders, we're concerned about delivering these more efficient workflows to those users, the businesses moving to these other jurisdictions actually doesn't help the problem of allowing users in the US to access these workflows. And so this is like a huge unsolved problem that I think, we see these trends, we see these businesses jurisdiction shopping, but ultimately we do want these technologies, these workflows to be available to US users. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be getting much closer to that.
Yeah, another thing that the article points out, and of course, as always, we'll have links to the articles below the videos and stuff, so you can go read the whole article if you want. But some interesting, items that they're pointing out is, given that reality that we're talking about, the challenge that many US-focused firms are having right now with that uncertainty, a lot of venture capital firms are also a little reluctant to invest in that uncertainty in the US. So we're seeing a considerable uptick in investments in groups that are focusing on the Asian markets. Notably, I think Amber Group is a one worth talking about. Amber Group obviously does data, market making, a whole bunch of stuff, but they just raised $300 million. And they're an Asian group that's really expanding in many jurisdictions over there. There was another one that was notable. Hong Kong Zanpool raised $27 million in a Series A. There's a lot of Asian countries right now that are ranking really high on the global stats in terms of user adoption and the relative growth rate in some of those jurisdictions. I think Hong Kong, obviously, we talked a lot about that with their recent push, I guess, to start accepting crypto, or to start granting crypto licenses. Singapore, Vietnam, and then of course India is pretty interesting. Another thing that's also worth noting is we're seeing some of the big centralized esque projects starting to expand to Asia also, and to try to diversify out of the uncertainty in the US. Gemini and Circle are both expanding to Asia also. Do you think, Patrick, that this is going to spark a little bit more motivation in kind of North American regulators or US regulators or policymakers to get their poop in a group? Or do you think this is just that they don't really care what happens? They're trying to, in their minds, get it right. Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I mean, my concern, I hope it does, but my concern is that, again, we've seen this isn't a new phenomenon. We've seen this pattern over a period of years now with companies going overseas, going to alternative jurisdictions to set up their businesses. So policymakers in the US are aware, they're already aware of this trend. So, I'm not so sure that this newest news is going to kind of change the calculus for any of them. But
I sure hope so.
I hope so. I mean, look, my view is, and we've talked about this before, in the US, over the medium term, there will be a way for these technologies to be made available to users in a compliant way. In the US, it's I think true for most major jurisdictions, and kind of while that plays out, that's kind of over a slightly longer arc, that's over the medium term. And while that plays out, there's going to be a lot of kind of short-term reshuffling in terms of where, which jurisdictions are most optimal from the standpoint of businesses. I also think there's probably some important calculus, and you mentioned this. I think what we're seeing is, and we have been seeing this jurisdiction shopping, but I think we're also seeing companies are actually wanting to target users in these other jurisdictions. So it's not just that they want to find kind of a safe harbor to operate their businesses from. They actually also want to go target users in Asia. And I think that's really smart and that's really important. And as that user base grows, then this concern that businesses have about being able to access US users, unfortunately, that becomes less of a concern the more the user bases grow in these other jurisdictions. So, I think there's also that part of it. But I do think this is important about over the medium term, we're going to see more clarity in terms of the regulatory pictures. And in the intermittent periods, there's going to be a lot of reshuffling. And when I talk to people who are based in Hong Kong, I'm not sure if you've had the same experience. A lot of them don't plan to be there in the long run. So right. Even the people who are moving there and setting up shop there aren't thinking of it as a permanent solution. there are all types of other kind of macro or geopolitical risks associated with having your businesses in Hong Kong. Yeah. And so I think a lot of businesses aren't thinking of this as like a 10, 20 year thing. They're thinking of it as a few years, maybe 5 years. And so I think we'll continue to see this reshuffling until we get that clarity, but we will eventually get the clarity.
Yeah, it's good to see businesses expanding. One thing that's always been a bit obvious, I think, in the space as an emerging market is we see either groups focus primarily on Asia or, excuse me, it is a live show, so every now and then I will sneeze or say something stupid. But anyways, now I lost my train of thought completely. What was I saying?
Users in Asia, companies moving to Asia.
Oh, yeah. So, there's a lot of users, there's a lot of companies diversifying, but we've always kind of, as North American or Western type protocols, it's a bit of a black hole in terms of how to market and how to communicate with and gain traction in Asia. And so what's been also really promising of late is there's a lot of firms, especially with all of these expansions into Asia, also from Western jurisdictions. I think we're seeing a lot more, or a significant reduction in the friction of being able to, acquire users, understanding who the appropriate vendors are, how to actually deal in the Asian markets. I know for us it was a big challenge. We brought on a bunch of advisors from the Asian markets and different things to try to figure out how to navigate the space. I think it's still a huge area of opportunity for us. Anyways, we can move on a little bit from Hong Kong and talk briefly here about Vietnam. So there's kind of a cool little initiative, I would say, going on in Vietnam right now. The vast majority of user adoption in Vietnam is actually from referrals from friends and family, like people literally trying to help their friends and family, find new ways to acquire some version of wealth, which for countries like Vietnam can pose some pretty incredible opportunity. I know there's a lot of really, really good developers coming out of Vietnam, as Southeast Asia, all of that area of the world. There's some incredible engineers, incredible evangelists of the space. Have you heard anything late about Vietnam, Patrick, or what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on Vietnam. We do have some developers that work in the area who are exceptional. So that's been my experience as well. I would say it's a little hard to interpret these referral numbers when they say, 2.5 times more people are using crypto in Vietnam from referrals relative to the US. Yeah. I think you have to control for a bunch of other things there to be able to interpret that. I don't know if that means there's really a true word of mouth phenomenon, or if the crypto companies who operate in Vietnam just happen to have more aggressive rewards programs that are targeting potential users more successfully, and so it's hard to tease out what's driving that higher number.
That's a really good observation. I think one of the reasons that we do this show is often to help people be a little bit more critical when they're looking at some of this stuff. And one of the challenges with statistics, and in particular statistics derived from surveys, is there's a whole bunch of interesting factors that play in that we don't naturally think about. You can get a whole bunch of data, and if you remove data on one of the tails, the result is a hell of a lot different. So what you'll see with a lot of these people quoting statistics often, and I'm not sure that's what happened here, but what you'll see is they'll remove unfavorable date ranges, and then they'll just have the favorable time period, and all of a sudden numbers look great. Another challenge is you get pretty significant confirmation bias in these surveys. So 90% of respondents in this survey said that they use DeFi. Well, it's not 90% of the population. It's a gross overrepresentation of the people that took the time to fill out the survey, which leads to that confirmation bias. Given that you're an academic, recovering academic, I guess, is that something like, how do you control for that? And when you're reading papers and when you're looking at stuff that other academics have done, or even peer reviewing, what are your thoughts on statistics and surveys? Like, how do you guys adjust for that? How do you quality control?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think why this 2.5x number jumped out at me, is just because I've been trained to think about, okay, when I see a statistic that's reported, what are some plausible alternative explanations that I can't rule out based on the information they've provided? And there are usually a variety of alternative plausible explanations that you can't rule out. And when you go look at the academic literature, a big portion of these empirical papers, a fair amount of resources and time in these papers is spent trying to convince the reader that they have ruled out these other plausible explanations. They've taken steps to make sure that they aren't plausible where they can. Right. And so with this 2.5x number, there's just a lot of things. They haven't given us enough information to rule out a variety of different explanations. And so I think you just get trained you eventually just start thinking like that whenever you see these statistics.
It always blows my mind. You and I are outside of this are quite good friends. We hang out all the time, personally in real life and stuff. And I'm always amazed at just the analytic mind that you have to approach some of this stuff. We always have these conversations. I'm like, damn, I didn't think about that at all. But I guess that's why academics are still valuable in this world. Okay, we can move on a little bit, but actually before we jump away, there was some things that I like to choose to believe out of this article, even though it's probably plagued with the same challenges. A lot of the people that did respond think that the bear market is near ending, and 70% of them, and 75% of respondents say that they want more crypto regulation, even in Vietnam. And so I think, again, it's probably a gross overrepresentation given the confirmation bias. But I do like that positive sentiment. And I think that's consistent in a lot of jurisdictions. We're starting to see a little bit more confidence that we're probably not out of the woods yet, but getting close to hopefully that inflection point. Okay, yeah. So let's jump back on our private jet, your private jet. I don't have one yet, but on your private jet, and we'll fly over to India. So have you heard of CoinSwitch and CoinDCX?
Not until I read the brief this morning.
Okay. Yeah. So we've talked a good amount actually over the last few months about India in particular, because they have been almost as flip-floppy over the last 5 to 7 years as China. Yeah, India bans crypto. Just kidding. India loves crypto. Just kidding. India hates crypto, isn't going to regulate it. There's no way to deal with it. Just kidding. India is going to regulate crypto and make a couple of centralized exchanges. They've done a lot of different things. And for that reason, I think they're having a hard time for an economy that really could benefit from this type of technology. Obviously, they have a massive population, a massive poverty problem. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. What's incredible about India is they have some of the most intelligent people on earth, engineers on earth. I mean, every country does, but India has a lot of incredibly intelligent people. And so there's some incredible technologies, but I think with all the flip-floppiness, we're seeing a little bit of a struggle over there in terms of adoption. So why this article is important is we're seeing a lot of these kind of emerging markets starting to expand and really grow their user adoption, really grow the volumes of transactions and so on as regulation comes out. The exact opposite is happening in India right now. CoinSwitch had to lay off almost 10% of its customer support division because there's not enough customer queries. It's a bear market and they're not acquiring new users. CoinDCX reduced its team by 12%, saying there's a few things. They have some interesting tax structures there and so on. India, if you remember, I don't know if you remember this, but India put a 30% tax on crypto gains in 2022 and a 1% tax on all transfers of crypto assets. And so a lot of people are speculating that it's those factors and those, fairly high taxation levels relative to many other jurisdictions that are maybe scaring some people away. Do you see India? I know you guys have a lot of partners and friends in that part of the world, engineers and so on. What are your thoughts on the Indian markets and what is it going to take for that to hopefully round the bend?
Yeah, I think part of what we're seeing is just a natural. Some of this about the layoffs is just a natural part of the process of restructuring toward the end of the bear market. You mentioned earlier that the sentiment might be changing. I'm seeing kind of mixed signals, but that's better than before where it was only bad signals. And so I think this type of restructuring where businesses really start cutting costs, that will typically be happening toward the end of a bear cycle. So I think there is an optimistic interpretation of this. I'm definitely not an expert on user adoption in India. Obviously, it's an enormous market. So I think the more that can be done to make this technology available to those users, the better off they will be. So obviously we should be pushing for that, but I do think some of this, cost cutting for some of these companies, no matter what jurisdiction they're in, it's just part of kind of a natural part of the macro cycle, and we shouldn't. If anything, we should expect that it's kind of a harbinger of things turning around in the semi-near future. You've talked about this before. We've seen a few other positive signals flash recently. There's going to be a significant uptick in new token launches around Q1 of next year. Again, I think this restructuring in some of these Indian exchanges is just part of that cycle.
Hey, we might even be launching a new token around Q1 of next year. Who knows? Okay, so before we wrap up today, we're going to jump on a quick flight over to Africa. And it's not hot enough here in Miami for Patrick and I, so we're going to go to Africa and see if we can get some more sun. But anyways, one of the groups that I have very confidently said FU to for our FU Friday episodes a couple of times now is in fact WorldCoin. And so just to set this up a little bit, the founder of OpenAI, ChatGPT, also has founded WorldCoin and has been working on it for quite a while. They raised, I think, $100 million at like a 1 billion plus valuation, like super early on. So for anybody that doesn't know, one of the things that WorldCoin is claiming to do is they're doing iris scans. So they're on their blockchain, they're turning bio data into something that you can actually use for many different applications, and it's a form of applying or of offering identity documents and a way to prove identity to countries that many of the citizens don't have cards and ID cards and passports and all of this stuff, and that contributes a lot to obviously the unbanked problem in many of these jurisdictions. So WorldCoin came out and said, hey, we're going to do this iris scan thing. It's kind of cool, whatever. But the challenge, and there's been a lot of challenges in particular from a lot of these African countries, they were essentially paying people $49 to scan their iris worth of assets. Now, for people in in this case, Kenya, or Nigeria is the one we talked about a few weeks ago that told WorldCoin to beat it. That's a lot of money in those jurisdictions. Like that's for a lot of people, that could be, their weekly, or in some cases, unfortunately, a monthly salary. So all these people are signing up for this, but there's a ton of criticism about data security and about identity fraud and identity theft, and they don't really have a very solid way to. I would assume that they have the expertise to be able to shore this up, but so far the criticisms have been met with silence. So it's kind of interesting. Had you heard about WorldCoin before today? Is this something? Have you and I talked about this?
Definitely, I've heard of WorldCoin. I don't know about this. I don't know too much about the details of the most recent news with the Kenyan government. My understanding is they did have kind of a pilot program where they were using this. They actually have some hardware where they were using this to scan people's eyes. They were doing this in Berlin, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and they only recently started this bigger program that's global. I would say, some of the optics aren't great here, but I'll push back against, I think, the conventional narrative here. I think this is a very important and potentially powerful use case, and I also wouldn't count Sam. I'm not sure what the right phrase is, but I wouldn't count him out. Sam Altman, no. I would take it seriously, and I do think they have a real vision for a potentially revolutionary use case, which is kind of a global non-governmental standard for identity. Something like that would be hugely valuable, I think.
One of the angles that they were talking about, and this actually, to your point, is I think that it's not just some willy-nilly strategy. I think this is a strategy that he's had in parallel to the proliferation of AI. And the reason for that is we've all seen these incredibly well-done deepfake videos, and we've all seen these incredibly well-done deepfake photos. Back in the day, Photoshop, you had to be essentially an expert to Photoshop something in a way that people couldn't figure it out. Now you can just throw it in Midjourney, and often you can get, and other platforms, Midjourney is just one of them, but you can throw it in a whole bunch of AI platforms, and you can get these incredible outputs that are so real that it's almost mind-blowing. But the problem with that is, how do you verify your identity as a real human? In the age of AI, in the age of robots, so to speak. And Sam Altman, that's one of his big points for why they're doing this, is to try to create a universal basic income. Pretty lofty goal. Kind of sounds like SBF, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Universal basic income, and then of course a way to differentiate, not just to offer identification, digital ID, but also to differentiate humans via iris scans from deepfake videos and AI generated content. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. The last one that we're going to talk about today is the Nigerian crypto exchange, Patricia. So as you can imagine, anytime a centralized exchange offers a token, there's a whole bunch of scrutiny that usually comes with that, saying, why are they offering these tokens? Are these tokens registered? Are they actually being collateralized, or is it just a way to collateralize a fake asset for real assets, which is what we saw happen with FTX, and we've seen it happen with some of these other centralized exchange tokens, so to speak. This particular one is a debt token, so it acknowledges debt to the token holders in exchange for the purchase of said token. To me, that sounds in many ways like it should be a regulated product. So that's kind of where they're bumping up against it. What's your experience been with these? Like examples of this, obviously the FTT token, BNB token, so on and so forth. Do you think these are good for the space, Patrick? Or do you think maybe we should try to tell them to chill out a little bit?
Good question. I think the idea of obviously tokenizing claims to different aspects of businesses' productivity, that's a huge use case, and being able to do that is super important. Once you do that, it does quickly become something that looks like a regulated security in the US. I'm not sure what the laws are in these other jurisdictions, but if it's a debt instrument typically is a regulated security. So my guess is they will have some challenges with the local regulatory authorities. If they have, I don't know much about the story, so maybe they've already kind of worked with them to kind of make that clear. Yeah.
It's my understanding that they, well, it's not my understanding. They received one of the exchange licenses from Nigeria. I can't remember what the exact numbers were. There's quite a few licenses that were applied for, and a handful were granted. And the next kind of grouping of licenses to be issued in Nigeria, I think, is coming in Q2 or 3 of 24. I can't remember the exact dates. The application deadline is Q1, end of Q1, I think. Anyways, so they are a regulated entity, but I think, Nigeria, as you can imagine, is trying to establish some rules and guidelines in response to a lot of this, and I'm just not sure that the structure is there. One final thing to talk about quickly: we don't have any chyrons or banners or anything for this because it kind of came out pretty late last night. But Uniswap, Hayden and pretty much anybody else on crypto Twitter was posting about the big win that Uniswap had in the Southern District of New York court. And so essentially, just to quickly set that up, and then we can chat about it a little bit. But Uniswap was being sued by the Southern District of New York, suggesting that it's their ultimate responsibility for scam token listings on Uniswap. And Hayden, to his credit, has been very vocal about how, due to the nature and structure of smart contracts and the permissionless nature of Uniswap, they in fact can't be liable for what other people use the technology for. It's kind of something, his argument is somewhat similar to the social media exemption from being a content editorial. So if somebody says something on your social media platform, you're not necessarily responsible legally for what they've said, at least currently. Section 230 in the US, that's what that discussion is always all about. Anyways, do you think this is big for the space? I think I have some thoughts on this, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't see much price action, so I don't know how much, when we saw the Grayscale news, we saw a lot of price action. I don't think we saw a price action surrounding the Uniswap, even on any of like the alts or DeFi coins that I saw. Maybe on Uniswap itself, I didn't look.
There were some decent jumps in some of the charts last night, but
nice.
It kind of coming on behind this. It was pretty late that most of this came out, though. But go ahead.
Nice. I think the more we can the more we can gather these kind of free speech style wins in the courts for DeFi, I think that's better for access. It's also better for the path to regulation will be kind of easier to pave if we get some of these standards agreed on. I'm not convinced, to be honest, just because I think right now part of the regulators are pretty far behind the tech builders, and I mean it's very easy for someone like Uniswap. I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but like if you're an application developer and you have a contract factory, it's quite easy to build controls into the contract factory to make sure only certain addresses can deploy new contracts or whatever. So from a technology standpoint, it would actually be quite easy for them to build in measures to ensure that only approved coins have new pools deployed.
I think it's a philosophical question more than anything right now, right? I mean, Hayden's been a big proponent, of course, of decentralization.
Yeah.
And I guess here's where I shake out on this, and we've gone over time. You and I are really good at going over time. But here's where I shake out on this one. I think overall it's good for the space, but not in the way that everybody thinks. US regulators have been abundantly clear that exchanges that serve US persons will be regulated in a meaningful way. And there will be requirements and there will be compliance restrictions and so on and so forth. So anybody that thinks that this is like a big fat check mark for DeFi. Forget TradFi, forget regulation. This is a win. We're never going to be regulated. I don't think that that's the case at all. Where I think it's good for the space, though, is I think it's all of these kind of short-term wins are pushing the SEC back a little bit and saying, let's go, policymakers. Let's go, lawmakers. Let's figure this the hell out. Let's get some legislation on the books so we actually have something meaningful that applies to this technology. And so hopefully with Grayscale and with this, the SEC is going to say, okay, instead of just trying to push their position and focus on enforcement, let's start working together on getting some policy out so that we can actually move forward. So that's where I shake out on this. I think all in all, it's good because no matter what, now they've been cleared from things that happened up until today in terms of, asset listings and so on. Permissionless listing on exchanges, especially with all of the scams and rugs and all that nonsense that still happens in the space. And I just don't see a world where that's going to be allowed. Go ahead.
I would just say I think it is also just for the Uniswap team, and they have contributed so much to the space. It's unambiguously good news that the class action suit was dropped against them. So I think we should make that clear. The implications for the long-term regulation may still be ambiguous, but I think in terms of the implications for them as a team, unambiguously good.
Especially in the short to medium term, absolutely. Do I think that they're going to have to pivot? Yeah, but at least they got the regulators off their back for the time being. They do have an incredible in-house counsel team, and they have a lot of firepower. Uniswap is one of the largest entities in the space, right? So they've got a lot of cash too. So I'm cheering for you, Hayden. Fight the good fight on behalf of the space in general so that we all don't have to go bankrupt trying to do the same thing. Anyways, Patrick, it's been a pleasure, my man. I super appreciate you coming on. A quick shout out to Persistence. I forgot to do that before. The merch I'm wearing today. If you haven't heard of them, go check them out. Love this shirt. Big fan. We are a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, share, subscribe. We're on all the major platforms. Please help us get the word out. We do this, honestly, just to help more objective approaches to understanding blockchain and crypto. And the best way to help us get that word out is through referrals and shares and likes. So without any further ado, today I say to you, Patrick, go FUD yourself.